What is up, guys? Welcome back to another UFC prediction video. This week we got UFC Vegas 88 Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura. I'm going to be giving my full card predictions for each of the fights on this card, and we're going to get into it here in a moment. Last weekend we had UFC 299, one of the best cards of all time, full of excellent fights, plenty of highlight moments, and super exciting bouts. And we did really well on our predictions, getting only one fight incorrect for my picks. And that was, unfortunately, Benoit Saint-Denis getting slept out bad by Dustin Poirier. But other than that, super accurate with our predictions, once again, for the pay-per-view. So we're going to look to keep that momentum going here into this fight night card, and we're going to get right into it now. All right, for our first fight on the card, we got Chad Anheliger versus Charalampos Gregorio, and I'm going to be taking Gregorio to win this fight by decision. Of course, he's coming off of a good win in the Dana White Contender Series, seems to have a pretty good overall, well-rounded striking approach to mixed martial arts, and of course, Anheliger, coming off of 2 losses, 37 years old in the bantamweight division. He's been in the UFC longer, but he kind of lacks the momentum going into this matchup for me to pick him. Of course, with these low-level prelim fights, especially on Apex cards, you never really know how it's going to go, so it can be a shot in the dark. But I'm going to be going with Gregorio here to get a decision in this matchup. And in this bout as well, Gregorio was already scheduled to be on this card, and Anheliger was not. He actually stepped in on short notice for Kazama, so that's just another reason to pick against him. I never really like picking these people fighting on short notice, so just another reasoning for that one. And for our next fight on the card, we got Jacqueline Amarim versus Corey McKenna. I'm going to be taking Corey McKenna to win a decision here. Amarim has lost to Sam Hughes, so that's just really not a good look in my opinion. I worry about picking these younger fighters who are in their mid-20s. McKenna's only 24 years of age, but she's been in the UFC a while. I think she's going to be able to start getting into her stride now that she's just going to be maturing and gaining strength overall as an athlete. I think she wins the decision here versus Amarim. Probably going to be a pretty stinky WMMA decision, but we'll see how it goes. Not going to get too into the weeds on that one, but I am going to take McKenna by decision in this matchup. Our next fight on the card, we got Danny Silva versus Josh Culibao, and I'm going to be taking Josh Culibao to win this fight by decision. I think we're going to get a lot of decisions here on this card, but realistically, Danny Silva, he did have an excellent fight versus Angel Pacheco on the Contender Series. That was an absolute war, super entertaining fight, but Culibao, he's proven in the UFC, going to draws with guys like Charles Jourdain, had 3 wins after that, and his most recent fight, he did lose, but it was to Lerone Murphy, who is a very class featherweight in that division. So not a bad loss to have on your record. Danny Silva was fighting in the LFA, got awarded that contract on the Contender Series, but I think that he will not be able to get a win here versus Culibao. He might be able to bounce back. He will be having fun fights. I think that's just kind of his style, but he's a little bit raw for me to pick him in this matchup. Look for Culibao to just show his experience here and win a pretty comfortable decision. That's how I see this fight going, and I think that him reflecting a -180 price tag, slight favorite, I think that's about accurate. So give me Culibao by decision in this matchup. All right, our next bout on the card, we got Mitch Ramirez versus Thiago Moises. And again, this is another short notice replacement. Originally, Thiago Moises was supposed to face Brad Riddell. Riddell had to pull out, and up steps Mitch Ramirez. Ramirez was a Carlos Pratas victim on the Dana White Contender Series. He did bounce back with a KO win in the LFA, and now he's getting a shot against Thiago Moises, but I think that this sudden step up in competition is not going to favor him. I think that Moises will find a pretty easy submission in this fight. He has very good grappling and been fighting in the UFC for a long time. And even though Moises has been in the UFC for a good amount of time now, he's still only 28 years of age. So you have to imagine that he's still improving, not as fast as a younger fighter would, but he still has some room to improve. And his most recent losses, you're talking about Joel Alvarez, you're talking about Islam Makhachev, and of course, Benoit Saint Denis. All three of those guys are incredibly dangerous and definitely going to be a big step down in competition when he faces Mitch Ramirez this weekend. So I think he's going to find himself a pretty easy finish here. A submission, give it to me in the first round as well. Our next fight on the card, we got Jafel Fialho versus Ode Osborne. And this is a pretty classic like grappler versus striker matchup. Ode Osborne has some pretty tricky kickboxing on the feet. Fialho, good submissions, grappling on the ground as well. I'm going to be taking Fialho to win by submission here. Of course, in Osborne's last fight, he did get subbed versus Asu Almabayev. And it turns out that Almabayev is an absolute problem. He impressed me a lot with his performance at UFC 299. So that's not a horrible loss to have on your record. But I think that Fialho will be able to pull off something similar. Maybe not as quick, but I could see him working himself into the fight slowly and then finding a submission maybe second or third round. Fialho, his debut in the UFC was against Muhammad Mokaev. So talk about, jumping into the deep end right away. Lost that fight, but came back in his next fight to win by submission. And I think he'll be able to get that done again in this fight. I think that Fialho will get himself a second round submission against Ode Osborne. So that's going to be my prediction for this fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Osborne has learned from his last fight and really tries to improve his takedown defense and grappling as a whole and is able to keep it on the feet and piece up Fialho. But I was thinking that was going to happen. I was originally leaning towards Osborne, but after rewatching some tape, I do think that Fialho will get it done. We'll see how this prediction ages, but my final pick is going to be Fialho round 2 submission. Our next fight on the card, Chelsea Chandler versus Josie Nunes. And I mean, come on now. Do we really have to look into this too deeply? The Brazilian named Nunes is going to win the WMMA fight. Of course, she is at a little bit of a size disadvantage. She's only 5'2" compared to 5'8" for Chelsea Chandler. But, I mean, it's just kind of one of those predictions here. I mean, it's 90% Nunes, 10% Chandler on Tapology. Chandler 1-1 in the UFC. Nunes 3-0, looking to continue her momentum here. So I think Nunes gets herself a decision victory here in this matchup. Our next fight on the card, we got Mike Davis versus Nathan Levy. And I'm going to be picking Mike Davis to get this one done. He does impress me. He just has a good overall skill set. Good with the grappling, able to get takedowns as well. The only reason I hesitate to pick him is because he has been incredibly inactive. I think only 4 fights in the last about 5 years. So he does have an activity issue. Not a lot of fights as opposed to Levy, who has had 2 fights in the last 2 years. So more activity on his side. We'll have to see how Mike Davis looks coming into this fight. I always hesitate to pick guys coming off of long layoffs, but like Dominic Cruz said, ring rust is just a myth. So I think he will be able to get the job done in this fight. It might not be a super clean performance, but I think that his overall skill set and his grappling advantage will be able to get this fight, to the scorecards for him. I don't think he gets a finish. I don't think Levy finishes him, but I think he gets it to the scorecards and probably edges out a 29-28, kind of a stinky fight. But I do see Mike Davis winning this, mainly just based off of physicality and probably just holding Levy against the fence, maybe getting some trips. We'll see how the fight goes, but I do got Mike Davis by decision in this one. Our next fight on the card, we got GM3 versus Brian Barberena. I think that GM3 is going to put on a masterclass in this fight. I think he's going to be able to take down Brian Barberena and do whatever he wants to him once he gets him to the mat, to be honest. He'll probably find himself a sub round 1 or 2. Brian Barberena just kind of looks like a turtle on his back when he's on the ground, just kind of looks lost down there. And when you have Muradov taking you down over and over again, I'm going to pick GM3 to get the job done against Brian Barberena. He does have a fun fight style, and, he might get lucky with a knockout. He had a really good fight with Robbie Lawler back in the day, but For this matchup, stylistically, it's kind of a nightmare for him. So I think that GM3 will get a submission victory in this fight to start out the main card. Our next fight on the card, we got Christian Rodriguez versus Isaac Dalgarian. And I'm going to be picking Isaac Dalgarian to get himself a round 2 TKO in this matchup. Christian Rodriguez has low-key impressed me a little bit. He did beat Rosas Jr. in a good performance from him in that fight, getting a win over the young prospect, as well as getting a nice win over Cameron Simon. But he is moving up to featherweight because even in the fight versus Cameron Simon, he did miss weight. So he's been having some issues getting down to bantamweight and moving up to featherweight now, facing Isaac Dalgarian, who had a very impressive first fight in the UFC, got a nasty ground and pound TKO. And I think we could see something kind of similar here. Christian Rodriguez is used to these smaller guys, Rosas Jr., Cameron Simon, and they are pipsqueaks compared to Isaac Dalgarian, who's super explosive, really good takedowns, former college wrestler, and he had some good college success in the sport of wrestling as well. I think that'll carry over for him in MMA pretty good. He does land takedowns, and once he actually lands his takedowns, he's not just stinking it up. Like, he actually goes for ground and pound and is aggressive. And Christian Rodriguez is pretty good in the grappling, but it's more so from a defensive standpoint. I don't think he's going to be able to get Dalgarian down at all, and I think there's going to be just a really big physicality discrepancy leaning in the favor of Dalgarian, and I think he continues his win streak, stays undefeated. And I think Christian Rodriguez is going to take an L in this featherweight matchup. Give me Isaac Dalgarian by round 2 TKO. Our next fight on the card, we got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Ovince St. Preux. And I'm going to be taking Kennedy to get a round 1 knockout in this fight. Even though he did lose his last fight to Dustin Jacoby. Jacoby's like a former Glory kickboxer, so that's always going to be a harder matchup for kind of a plottier power puncher like Kennedy is. And then before that, he had 3 wins, including a KO over Carl Robinson and Ion Cutelaba. Ovince St. Preux, his last win was 3 years ago. Since then, he's taken 3 KO losses, had the win over Shogun Hua, but that might as well have been Shogun's fucking corpse that he was fighting because he was so old at that point. Shogun was more washed than OSP is now then in their fight. So I think that Kennedy is going to just absolutely murk OSP in the first round. I don't know what he's doing fighting at 40 years of age. Needs to retire, probably just fighting for paychecks at this point. Kennedy might just retire him in this fight if the KO is bad enough. But OSP, he used to have that kind of like unorthodox style on the feet where it was a little bit hard to read, but once you lose all of your fast twitch ability and your power, you're not really going to be dangerous at all. And I think Kennedy will just be able to walk him down, not fearing anything coming back at him in return. And he'll just be able to plant a big right hand on the chin of OSP, flatlining him. And that'll be all she wrote. So in this matchup, give me Kennedy by first round KO. Our next fight on the card, we got Bryan Battle versus Ange Loosa. And I'm going to be taking Bryan Battle to win this fight by a second round KO. He's definitely live for a submission as well because Bryan Battle, even though he impresses me a lot on the feet with his striking, he also has really good jiu-jitsu ability. And I think that if Loosa wants to win this fight, he would have to play it kind of similarly to how he did with Reese McKee in their fight on the UFC Paris card. And I don't see him being able to pull off that type of game plan versus Bryan Battle. I think Battle is just way too dangerous with the submissions, with the striking as well. Has super crisp technique on the feet, and he has a good amount of experience for a young man. And even on the amateur scene, he was fighting guys like Impa Casagne, Cody Brundage. His most recent loss was to Renat. So not a horrible look, but still not a good look. But, you know, he's still a young fighter, so he's going to be improving. He had a good submission win over Carlos Urbina as well. Choked out Petrosky, so he definitely has a submission threat live in this fight. I think that'll make Loosa a little more hesitant to go for the takedowns and use his physicality against Battle. I think it'll take place at range for the most part, which Ange Loosa even though he has big power, he can come forward aggressively. I don't think that him winging big overhands versus Battle is going to end well for him. I think Battle might slip him onto a head kick or something along these lines. I really am impressed by Battle. I think he's going to be a good fixture in the welterweight division in the future. And this division as a whole is just looking insane. I mean, at the higher level, of course, Battle isn't there yet, but you got guys like Ian Gary, JDM, Shavkat, MVP now, and guys like Battle, once they get up there in the top 10, I think that we're going to have some really fun fights on our hands. But, you know, Angelusa made it a close fight with Reese McKee, and he almost got finished in that third round. He wasn't looking too good, got really tired, and I don't think that Battle is going to have any issues with his cardio, and I think that he'll be able to get out of any type of bad grappling situation he finds himself in, either by hitting a submission and finishing the fight or threatening that submission, being able to reverse the position that he's in and get back to range where he can do some of his best work. Give me Bryan Battle to win this fight by second round TKO. But with Battle's last win being over AJ Fletcher by submission, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he drops Angelusa and then jumps onto a submission, kind of like a Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje situation. But I think I'm going to play it by KO this time out, just because I think that Angelusa will overextend trying to throw a power punch, and Battle will be able to counter him. And I think that he will be able to find the ground and pound TKO before he looks for the submission. But submission and KO are both very possible, but I see him getting a finish. But like I said, I will lean KO in round 2 for Bryan Battle in the co-main event this week. And last but not least, we go to the main event of the evening, Marcin Tybura versus Tai Tuivasa. And this is an interesting one. Marcin Tybura could obviously stink it up if he doesn't get flatlined in the first round. He's kind of one of those heavyweights that likes to go to a decision, just kind of lay and pray. But of course, he's going to be up against Tai Bam Bam Tuivasa, who's going to go in there. He's going to leg kick the fuck out of you. He's going to slug if he starts to face adversity, which, you know, doesn't always help him, like we've seen in his last 3 fights. But I think taking a step down in competition this time out will help him. Of course, he's only really lost to the best guys in that division, Volkov, Pavlovich, and of course, Ciryl Gane. Marcin Tybura isn't going to be giving Tai Tuivasa any of the problems that those 3 opponents were, unless Tai is just kind of completely out of it on fight night and can't find a quick finish and eventually gets lay and prayed from Tybura. I think he'll show up with an initiative to break this 3-fight loss streak that he is on and find himself a round 1 KO. So, in the battle of the bowling balls, give me Tai Tuivasa by KO in the first round in the main event of UFC Vegas 88. So that is my prediction for the main event. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and consider subscribing. I've been doing pretty good with the picks recently. Thank you guys for watching the video, and have a great rest of your day.